how does liberation fit in with happiness? A commenter pointed out that I've said several times that this process of awakening, unbinding, and so forth is not about happiness. And then they said, but you also say that it is about ending suffering. So I just wanted to address this common concern or perhaps misconception about happiness. First of all, I'll say that I've noticed over the years that different types of teachers or guides or non-duality folks will use the word happiness quite differently. Some will say that the underlying angst, frustration, anger, resistance to life will drop away with liberation. And all of that is what creates unhappiness. So you're left with the opposite, which is happiness. So I've heard it said that way. I've also heard it said that happiness is an emotion. It comes and goes, just like any emotion. But there's a different kind of experience called joy that doesn't have an opposite. It's there all the time. So obviously, depending on how you define things, this can get muddy really quickly. But I will answer the question from my own experience, and I will use the term happiness in what I consider to be the most common connotation, which is a momentary or passing experience of elation or something that does have an opposite, the opposite being unhappiness. It's an experience that's marked by the fact that it has been perceived in association with its opposite. Now, everyone might not think of it that way, but that's typically how I see it used. And we all have moments of elation in life. We all have moments of feeling very up, unusually joyful, perhaps. But we also have moments of being the opposite, having a very low mood, feeling very quiet, feeling dormant almost. So those cycles, in my opinion, my experience, don't really change that much. They do tend to soften as far as how intense they are. But as far as the tendencies or the conditions that govern our emotional experience moment to moment, they're still there. There still are conditions, and you're still subject to those conditions. So that's my answer in regards to happiness as an experience, as an emotion. But that's not what liberation's about. That's not what seeing through the fundamental illusion and then all the illusions that are built on top of it. Seeing through those illusions is about something far more mysterious, far more primary, far more important, and in my opinion, far more enjoyable, far more satisfying than anything in the emotion spectrum, than anything that the apparent separate self can feel as a sort of inflection in their experience or feel as a texture of the momentary flow of life. There's an ability to enjoy things just like there always was, but the context in which all that's happening is so different. There's so little concern for how that goes. There's so little concern for whether there's this mood or that mood or this experience or that experience or whether conditions are this way or that way. The freedom is being released from the struggle with and seeming need to have things a certain way, to be happy, to feel pleasure instead of pain. the identity being formed out of that, the false identity being formed out of that struggle, is what's uncomfortable. So uncomfortable. That's what suffering really is. Suffering isn't not being happy all the time. That's not what suffering is. Suffering is a pervasive feeling of not okayness. A pervasive feeling that I'm not in accord with the natural flow of things somehow. Suffering is this underlying feeling of shame, self-doubt, worry, anxiety that plagues so many people, most people to some degree, that we don't even notice it's there. We just assume that's how it is, how it's supposed to be. But it's not. It's not supposed to be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. I don't think it's supposed to be anyway, but it doesn't have to be that way. That underlying struggle with life, feeling small, feeling discrete, feeling separate, that is what suffering is. And it's a big experience. It's a dense experience. It's a very binding experience. It's like a dream you wake up from. It's like a fog you walk out of. That's what liberation's about. That's what awakening's about. The unbinding realization process, all of it. That's what it's about. Walking out of the haze of delusion, confusion, disorientation, struggle, belief that you have to try to find a way to make yourself happy as the small separate self. The small separate self can never feel happy, really. Not really. It can't feel deeply satisfied. It can feel momentarily happy, but it's just setting itself up to feel very disappointed later. So, yeah, what I'm pointing to here is beyond all of that. It's freer than anything you could imagine. By definition, by experience. It's free of all the bindings of the mind, of thoughts, time, space, birth, and death. That's what we're talking about here.